Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series here at Quality Clouds. Today, we're going to talk about code duplication. My name is Bill Taylor. I'm the VP of Customer Growth here based in Atlanta, Georgia in the US. And I'm joined by my colleague, Chris Riggs, who is our Senior Product Manager based in London. Hello, Chris. How are you?
No, I'm very well, thank you.
All right, great. So, um, before we get started, we've got a Q&A button, I believe at the bottom of the screen. Should you have any questions during this webinar, we can address those those questions live. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today. Chris, so let's go ahead and get started here. So, today's topic is code duplication. Can you just kind of set the stage? Can maybe a few examples of code duplication that might be found in ServiceNow and Salesforce platforms?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there are many ways in which this can exhibit itself, and I think obviously the first thing is we want to help you identify that code duplication because obviously by definition they're quite difficult to find. But yeah, I mean, on the ServiceNow side, I think we see lots of examples from our customers of particularly server-side scripts. That might be business rules or scripts includes where before, I guess, the needs of deploying functionality as quick as possible, sometimes the things that people do will be to kind of copy and paste a function that someone knows does the job into another business rule and move forward and deploy that change. So all of a sudden, you've got two blocks of code with the same functionality in your code base. Similarly, on the Salesforce side, obviously, there's a significant amount of kind of code normally kind of carried with Salesforce custom implementations. So in terms of Apex classes and methods, Apex triggers, inevitably we see the output in terms of people copying and pasting functionality, and that's just very common. I think it's something that is quite difficult to stop, but it obviously has an impact.
All right, thanks for that. What's the business impact to having, excessive amounts of code duplication in these platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is obviously that it's the impact can sometimes take a little bit of time to show itself. In the short term, you as I say, the behavior is to let's get this piece of functionality out the door. You're not necessarily going to see a problem on day two, right? But I think it's where over time, your code base as it grows, and you have more and more duplication in your code base, and obviously you don't necessarily know where it is. You're starting to kind of come up against some real challenges in terms of manageability and in terms of velocity. So obviously, if we've got a particular piece of code that needs to be changed for whatever reason, we now need to know where that piece of code is duplicated and then obviously update it in multiple different places. So that's going to take time. Inevitably, we may not update it in all the places we need to. And that means at some point in the future, all of a sudden we'll be scratching our heads saying, hang on a second, I'm sure we fixed that bug. And actually the problem is that it's somewhere else in the code base. And then I think, there are obvious kind of concerns around things like security, where if you do have a security vulnerability in your code, and that's, for example, picked up in the future by a static code analyzer as part of a deployment, again, what you may have is that situation where that vulnerability has not been patched in all the places that it exists in your code base. So that's obviously a bit of a risk. So obviously that leads you in general to kind of say, in general, you don't want to repeat yourself. You do want to kind of centralize code and reuse code as much as possible.
That's great. That's great. So, how has Quality Clouds addressed the identification of code duplication in our customers' environments?
Yeah, so I mean, as many on this webinar will probably already know, I mean, we already do a very comprehensive analysis of the coding configuration of ServiceNow and Salesforce platforms for our customers. And as part of that, we're obviously reading the code base in and analyzing it from a static analysis perspective. And so what that allows us to do is to maintain essentially a database of code blocks, which is set to, I think, roughly 10 to 15 lines of code. And then what we can therefore do is we can kind of check if we see those duplicates within the code base. So we're using that scanning capability we're already doing from a static code analysis point of view. And then we're adding in this ability to maintain a list of code blocks and check whether those code blocks are replicated anywhere in the environment. And then obviously that means that we can present that back to our customers in our portal. And that's going to show you a list of all the blocks of code we've found that are duplicated in the instance. And it's going to give you some insights into where those blocks are found, and also give you some kind of feeling for what we think perhaps the severity of that code duplication is, and also give you some insights into other technical debt around that code duplication.
Great. Is it something we could take a look at?
It sure is. Let me switch over to another tab. So we're looking at the code duplication dashboard in the Quality Cloud's portal for ServiceNow. Just to kind of reiterate, this functionality is also for our Salesforce customers. But just in terms of the content we're going to look at here, it's ServiceNow orientated. So if you are a Salesforce person, you can maybe use your imagination, and they'll maybe use some of the Salesforce language when we look at some of the detail. So first of all, what we're looking at is essentially a list of blocks. So this is blocks of code that we found in the instance. And as I say, we're using, I think off the top of my head, we're using 100 tokens as the length of the block that we're looking for duplicates of, which is roughly, depending on how you measure it, is probably roughly 10 to 15 lines of code. And so we're listing those out here. We're telling you where it was identified in. So this is what we would call the configuration element. So on the ServiceNow side, that could be a script include, could be a business rule. Obviously on the Salesforce side, that would probably be something like an Apex class or an Apex trigger. And then we can kind of see in the second column how many lines we have seen duplicated. So in this test one that we've got at the top here, we can see that we found 34 lines duplicated between a set of records. And we've got a medium category here in terms of how, roughly speaking, how important we think this is. And I'll come back to that in a second. In terms of what we call spots or occurrences, hopefully reasonably self-explanatory, we found this piece of code 3 times. So in this instance, or in the Salesforce world, your org or your repository, we've found this replicated 3 times. And then finally, in the open issues column, this is kind of where we bring together, I guess, the existing data that we have from a technical debt perspective, and also try and help you to understand, as well as duplication, perhaps you have particular kind of hotspots around that duplication from a technical debt perspective. So there's kind of 2 angles here, one of which is perhaps this code duplication is really important because it's a really big block of code that's duplicated. But perhaps it's maybe more important because actually, even though it's only 20 lines of code, we've actually got 10 technical debt issues in it. And you can kind of see here, if I quickly open this up, I'm just going to move Bill out of the way. This is bringing together the existing kind of technical debt information for this block. And you can kind of see here all the information that you would expect from a code analyzer in terms of the technical debt in this particular block. So you can start to kind of understand that you may want to, depending on kind of what your focus is, you may want to target those duplicated blocks that are carrying most technical debt, or you may want to start with sorting by the medium, high, and low. And the way that that is categorized, as I said, I would come back to that, is low essentially is, off the top of my head, is below 25 lines of code duplicated. Medium is 25 to 100, and then high is above 100. Okay, that's the way in which these are categorized. So you can kind of start to imagine that you would perhaps say, okay, let's address the larger blocks first, or potentially address those blocks that have got more technical debt. So that's the kind of the top level view. And you can see here, obviously, you can get this data out to Excel as well. So if, once you've kind of identified areas that you think are important, you can start to share that data perhaps with your team. But let's have a look at the actual kind of detail in here. So as I say, we found 3 occurrences of this particular duplicated code. These are the locations. So these are the three configuration elements that we have found this duplicated code in, and this is in my ServiceNow demo environment. We have 34 lines of code duplicated, and you can see this is a test environment because obviously it's just been copying and pasting business rules in ServiceNow, but you can see, so in each of these configuration elements, it's from line 1 to line 35, and then we just have a bit of kind of audit information in terms of who created that record and when it was last touched. And then for every one of these elements, we can click this, and it's going to take us through, in this example, to the ServiceNow instance. Obviously, if you were in Salesforce world, this would take you through to your org or potentially into your repository. And we could see that it's lines 1 to 34, which, guess what, is the whole function that has been replicated. And so you would find, if we went back to, let me just click that out of the way. I'm going to go back to demo. You're going to see some very similar looking code. And again, we see the same code here. Okay. So that would be the kind of the normal way of using this. Just to say, there's some pretty useful extra columns that you can add into this view. I think in particular, element type, application are particularly kind of important. So if we bring those in, now we can kind of see the type of element. So again, I think this is quite interesting. If you see a lot of duplication across a business rule, or I guess a UI script or something like that, there's an opportunity to rationalize that code perhaps into a function or into a separate scripting, a function in a script include, or perhaps into a new script include that you can call this functionality from in these multiple business rules. I think obviously if you saw multiple script includes duplicated in terms of code, you're going to have to kind of think about, okay, where from a sort of a business domain perspective, where is the right place for this function to live within that script include? But nonetheless, I think that's important information. And again, on the Salesforce side, you can imagine that's going to be your Apex classes, your Apex triggers, those types of components. And then application, again, on the ServiceNow side, obviously, may be very of greater interest to have a look within the context of a particular scoped application. On this, again, on the Salesforce side, you know, if you've built custom applications, again, you can just analyze from that perspective. And again, at this level, we can export this data. So we can just export this particular block with all of this information, so we can start to share that with our teams and colleagues. And I think at the end of the day, that's the kind of the core of the functionality. I say what I would say is just to kind of reiterate, you know, it's leveraging the core functionality of Quality Cloud. So this data is generated through a full scan. So obviously, if you're analyzing your instance on a schedule basis, which is what many of our customers do, you can imagine that this data is going to be regenerated every time you do that. So this would potentially be generated every week. And you can imagine how you could start to use this to obviously to get that insight into where that code duplication is, but also to start thinking about, once we start addressing this, start tracking the resolution. So you can kind of come back to Quality Cloud and prove that code duplication is now being removed from the instance.
So Chris, we've got a lot of customers that have already been utilizing the functionality of code duplication, kind of identification and dashboarding there. What are some, you know, do you have a favorite success story of one of our customers that has utilized the code duplication kind of dashboards and how they have been using that in their platforms?
Yeah, so we have on the Salesforce side, we have a global hospitality brand who I'm not allowed to mention that I think, you know, made great use of this screen in particular. I mean, they use Quality Cloud in general to really be very successful at burning down historical technical debt. But in actual fact, yeah, I mean, they managed to reduce the code duplication admin platform by, as they told us, around 93%. So it really was very significant. And I think they, you know, I mean, their sort of feedback to us was, you know, we just wouldn't really have been able to do this without this kind of visibility. So I think that was, you know, really, I mean, quite surprising actually from my perspective. I didn't think they would achieve quite as much as that and quite as quickly. You know, I think the thing to say, obviously, is it requires the organization to make this important. and it does require work to remove code duplication. But yeah, I mean, they were very successful in doing that. And I think, again, anecdotally, and they didn't provide us with any particular metrics on this, but I think, their anecdotal comment to us was, they did feel as if they were going faster, and they certainly felt that they were going faster in a more sustainable way, and there wasn't code hanging around in their code base that they didn't know about when they were making changes, which was also interesting to hear.
Yeah. All right. We did have a couple of questions that came through, and what we can do is I'll go ahead and ask the questions, but if it needs to go to a longer discussion, let's definitely schedule that offline. So Chris, one of the questions that came in was, what about code duplication in the app engine within ServiceNow? Is that something we can address here, or should we try to follow up offline to give a little bit more detail there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would require probably a bit more detailed follow-up.
Okay.
What I would say is that, I mean, as you could say within the dashboard there, we are capturing the application that the code duplication is found on. And so in that sense, you can start to kind of identify code duplication within an application. But I think it probably requires a bit of a deeper dive. Bill and I were talking about this earlier on. I think, we've got lots of interesting things on our roadmap in terms of what we want to do with code duplication. And I think that would very much talk to App Engine. So
yeah, so that question came in as anonymous, so I'm not exactly sure who asked that, but if you wouldn't mind just reaching out to me after this, we can set up a call to go into some of the details of your question that you're looking at there. Also, we did get a question about the recording. Yeah, this webinar is being recorded today, and we can certainly make that available. I think it's going to be on our website as well in a day or two. So we'll make sure that you guys get a copy of that. Another potentially detailed answer to a question is, does UI Builder script is the UI Builder script also included? Chris, any comments on that, or should we also take the
I will need to double check that.
Okay. All right.
I will double check that. Yeah.
All right. So I did capture the from Robbie there, asked that question. We will definitely get back in touch with you on an answer there. So any additional questions before we sign off today? I want to thank Chris for joining, and thank all the attendees today. We do have a couple of other questions that are popping through. If you wouldn't mind, please just reaching out to myself. I'm at btaylor@qualityclouds.com, and we will address those questions, those detailed kind of environmental questions specifically to your use case. This is kind of the first of a series of webinars that we're going to start here at Quality Clouds. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be introducing a brand new program we've got here called AI Shield. We're very excited about bringing that to you, and look more for that detail here in the coming weeks. So, Chris, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bill.
And we look forward to chatting with all of you very shortly. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.